Hello again, and welcome back to our educational series where we break down the National Electrical Code, one article at a time in simple, understandable language. Today we're finishing up working on space requirements listed in NEC 110.26a with Part 5, Separation from High Voltage Equipment. This rule may seem a little more sophisticated than others, but it's incredibly important, especially when low voltage and high voltage equipment are installed near each other. Let's get into what this rule says, why it was created, and what it means for you as a new electrician or electrical student. So far in 110.26a, we've talked about depth, width, height, and limited access. These all deal with making sure you have enough space to safely work on electrical gear. Now, in Part A5, the NEC is reminding us to also consider what else is around the equipment you're working on, especially if high voltage gear is nearby. Here is a simplified version of what the NEC 110.26A5 says. When working space is required for equipment operating at 1000 volts or less, that space must not be shared with equipment operating at over 1000 volts unless certain conditions are met, such as barriers or partitions separating the equipment. Let's say that again in even plainer English. If you're installing or working on low voltage equipment, like a standard electrical panel board operating at 480 volts, you can't share the same working space with a piece of equipment that runs at over 1000 volts unless there's proper physical separation. This separation can come in the form of a wall, a full-height barrier, or a locked door that separates the two areas. Why? Because high voltage systems pose a greater risk, and they require their own special safety precautions and clearances. So what is a big deal about separating low and high voltage equipment? The NEC added this rule because of real-world safety concerns. In the past, it wasn't uncommon to find a room that had both 480-volt panel board and a 13,000-volt transformer side by side, with no wall between them. This setup is extremely dangerous. Why? Because if you're working on the 480 equipment, you may be standing just inches away from high voltage gear. A fault, arc flash, or explosion from the high voltage side could injure or kill someone working nearby, even if you're not touching that equipment. The NEC stepped in and said, "That's not safe. Those systems need to be separated." High voltage gear often requires different PPE, restricted access, and trained personnel with special qualifications. If you allow standard electricians or maintenance techs to occasionally work near high voltage systems, you are creating a huge safety hazard. Let's work through a real-world example. Say you're working on a power distribution room in a large commercial building. You have been asked to install a 480 breaker panel, but in the same room there's a large cabinet that feeds a 4100 volt motor control center. Now, the room is big enough for both pieces of equipment, but here's the problem. If there's no wall, locked barrier, or full-height partition separating your low voltage panel from high voltage cabinet, then you're not compliant with NEC 110.26A5. Even if the space looks big enough, you still need to make sure that each type of equipment has its own dedicated working space, separated from each other by physical partitions, secure doors, or even by locating the equipment in separate rooms. Here are some easy to remember points about 110.26A5 that every beginner should know. Keep high voltage and low voltage equipment separate. Don't mix gear that operates above and below 1000 volts in the same working space, unless it's properly partitioned. Barriers matter. If you have to install both types in the same room, use walls or locked enclosures to separate them. Always check voltage ratings. Do not assume equipment is low voltage just because it looks like a normal panel. Always read the nameplate. Understand that high voltage equals higher risk. These systems can be lethal. Even standing near the wrong part of the high voltage gear can be a danger in the event of an arc or a fault. Talk to the authority having jurisdiction, AHJ. If you're unsure whether your installation meets code, get clarification. The AHJ can give you guidance on what counts as adequate separation. Let's wrap it up with a quick recap of NEC 110.26A5. This rule prevents shared working spaces between equipment rated 1000 volts or less and equipment rated over 1000 volts unless there's proper separation. The reason is safety. High voltage equipment is more dangerous and must be isolated from low voltage systems to protect workers and maintain clear access. Whether it's a wall, partition, or a separate room, the goal is always the same: protect workers from unintended exposure to high voltage hazards. Thanks for watching.